I come from the future to warn us in the past that we should add spoiler alert here.
It's like when they used to call them skin divers.
Yes. Do you think he killed his wife?
I think that's what you were led to believe. Whether or not,
I felt like it was up in the air.
well, a little bit. Also, could have been an accident
Sure.
because he was clearly had that spear gun resting on his knee, pointing at her.
Right.
Yeah.
The question is, did his neurons fire and make his finger move?
Right. Okay, so we took care of the spoiler.
That was like 5 minutes ago.
I know. And now we're back to cave diving, and we should talk a little bit about equipment. A lot of this came from one of our old How Stuff Works colleagues from the website, our old buddy John Fuller.
Who looks like MC Escher.
Looks like he's been mentioned twice today.
He's the tie that binds the Escher episode and the cave diving episode.
Yeah, and some of this equipment thing isn't the most exciting stuff in the world, but we should talk about it anyway.
I found it frankly arousing.
You got your mask, and this is something I didn't know. They use sort of simple black masks because it absorbs light,
Yeah.
which makes sense.
Yeah, because you're using your own light source, so it can get pretty bright. I saw a flashlight from Underwater Kinetics, maybe. It's like 15,000 lumens. Some ridiculous amount of lumens.
Just lots of lumens.
A lot of lumens. And yeah, if you have that stuff bouncing all over the place, you don't want your light, your gold glitter diamond dusted mask reflecting it in your eyes.
That makes sense.
Cuts down on visibility. But I take issue with Fuller saying that they favor simple masks because these guys do like the full face, like
Yeah.
BA mask.
Yeah, not the Brad Pitt skin diver 60s mask,
Right.
which I loved.
Yeah.
Great design.
I think some of them might, but I also saw plenty of them
Yeah.
have like, I'm trying to think of what to call it, but just a really cool full face mask.
Yeah, it looks like something that you could dive in a cave in or go to outer space in.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah. So then you've got your fins. Again, black rubber fins. But the difference here that I gather from this in open water is you don't want those super long, super bendy fins.
Right.
Because you're trying to not kick up silt.
Right.
So you want those shorter, stiffer fins. And when you're down there swimming around, you're using little, short, controlled kicks.
Yeah.
No big sweeping leg movements.
No, it's a huge difference between cave diving and open water diving.
Yeah.
Open water diving, your legs are extended out behind you,
Yeah.
and you're fluttering those fins up and down, and you're propelling yourself forward. In cave diving, your legs are bent at the knees, so your feet are up slightly above you, and mostly you're making frog kicks, which are all in the ankle.
Yeah.
And you're just kind of waddling yourself along with these little kicks. You see what I'm saying?
I love for 12 years you've been doing little physical gestures at me like anyone else in the world can see them.
Well, who am I talking to but you?
Oh, I know. That's the whole point.
So the frog kick, look, Chuck, like
I know.
this.
I see.
Here, this is what they do.
Little frog kicks.
But in doing that, you cut down on the potential of coming in contact with the rest of the cave. There's a couple of reasons why you want to do that. One, you want to preserve the cave. If you break off a stalactite coming from the ceiling, that's nature's work that you just messed with. You don't want to do that, bro. And then secondly, a lot of caves, pretty much all of them, have that silt sediment on the bottom.
That's your enemy.
If you kick it up,
Yeah.
you've got a silt out. So you want to really be careful what kind of movement you're making with your fins, and then just how big your fins are and how flexible they are. And then one other thing about that too, you also want to maintain basically perfect buoyancy, where you're completely neutrally buoyant relative to the top and the bottom of the cave.
Yeah, what do they call the movement? Dragon float?
Pull and glide.
Pull and glide?
Dragon float.
Yeah, it's sort of the
That's
same
what
thing.
you do when you recover a body.
Well, a lot of this is body recovery, very sadly. Well, not a lot of it, but part of search and rescue can very much involve going deep and getting very swollen, waterlogged bodies.
Right.
But yeah, you pull yourself along with your hand, like in a little groove by the rock, and then just let yourself glide. It seems very relaxing, considering you're doing the most horrifying thing on the planet.
Yeah, so you might do that even instead of kicking, depending on where the space is, how tight it is, that kind of thing. Also, it depends on how solid
Right.
the surroundings are.
'Cause
Like
you
you
don't
wouldn't do
wanna
that
pull
on
off a big chunk.
coral or anything
Yeah.
like that. And then also apparently you only do that when you have a current. There's one thing we should say. There's two kinds of cave diving: spring diving and sump diving.
Yeah.
And in spring diving, that's where you see like the pictures in like National Geographic magazine where
Right.
it's just this beautiful cave and there's just two people in scuba gear floating in the middle of it.
Yeah.
That's a spring-fed cave where you've got water moving through it, keeping it very clear because there's no way for sediment to settle
Right.
because the current's moving too quickly. And you use that current to pull and glide.
That looks like something that has a little bit more appeal.
Yeah, but I mean, it's just as dangerous as anything
Sure.
else. Like you said, most of the people who die cave diving die in Florida, and that's what they're doing is
Yeah.
diving in those springs.
That's true. You were part of the book. Like every
Basically, is what it is.
right.
And so you could have rapid decompression where your soda goes everywhere, or your blood vessels burst.
Yeah.
Or you can follow these timetables to get the nitrogen bubbles out of your blood. And like you're saying, it's a big problem with scuba diving, especially if you're down below 100 feet for an extended period of time. The nitrogen can really build up in your blood, which can give you the bends. You can also suffer from nitrogen narcosis, which is bad news, where you apparently feel like you're drunk because you're intoxicated on nitrogen.
Yeah, the same thing can happen with oxygen.
Yeah,
It's different, but you can have oxygen. What's it called?
oxygen toxicity.
Yeah.
Right. So there's like, if you're just doing like a dive or whatever, and it's like 30 feet of water, and you're down for like a half an hour or something like that, you're just breathing compressed air. Like they
Right.
just took air out of the air and put it into a tank, and that's what you're breathing, and you're fine.
They took air out of the air.
Exactly. So if you're down for a while and you have this problem with too much oxygen or too much nitrogen, they've started to get kind of crafty with the stuff that they put into the tanks. There's something called nitrox, which deals with the problem of nitrogen narcosis by removing a certain amount of the nitrogen and replacing it with oxygen. So with compressed air, with regular air that we breathe here at sea level, it's something like 78%.
Nitrogen.
Yes. And like, no.
21% oxygen.
Is that right? I had them backwards. So 22% oxygen, 78% nitrogen. In nitrox, you have something like 36% oxygen and the rest nitrogen. So because you have far less nitrogen there, you are susceptible to the bends in nitrogen narcosis, less susceptible than you would be breathing compressed air. So you can go down further and you can stay down longer. But the problem is, like you were saying, that oxygen toxicity can be an issue too. So they've come up with even other stuff.
Yeah, you can breathe helium. There's something called Heliox. 79% helium, 21% oxygen. The weakness here is, or I guess the downside, is that you lose body heat 6 times faster
Right.
than with compressed air or nitrox. So then you got to think about hypothermia because it's cold down there.
It is cold.
And then there's one called Trimix, which is oxygen, nitrogen, and helium. And apparently this is what you use for the deepest dives.
Yes. And it like all of these things have their pluses and their minuses. There is no perfect gas, but people have figured out things like if you want to use Heliox, you can stay down longer. You're not going to get nitrogen narcosis, and your case of the bends is probably you're less susceptible to the bends because the nitrogen's not present. But you also can't breathe that up closer to the surface. There's not enough oxygen in it, so you have to carry an extra tank of oxygen or mixed air to switch to as you get closer to the surface.
That's right.
There's like a lot of different clever things you can do to make it safer for you to stay down longer and go further into a cave system when you're diving in it.
Yeah, and the rule of thumb is they go by the rule of thirds, which I saw it described a little bit differently than the House of Works article describes it. The way I saw it is you want to make sure you always have 2/3 of your tank left when you're at your deepest part of the dive.
Yeah, I think that's what Fuller said.
Maybe he just said it in a way that sounded a little backwards, but yeah, that's the rule though.
Yeah.
Is if you know you're going to go to the very deepest spot you're going to, you want to only use 1/3 of your oxygen or of your tank mixture to get that far.
Right.
Because sometimes it can take longer to get out than it did to get in.
Yep.
And you want to be back on the surface with 1/3 left in your tank, basically.
Right. Plus, don't forget, you're also going to have to slowly unscrew the cap on the soda bottle, it takes time, and therefore it takes some of your air, your gas in your tank, to do the decompression schedule and slowly work your way up to keep those nitrogen bubbles from explosively producing in your blood.
Now, how do those tables work? Do you? I have no idea. Do you just learn this stuff?
You have it like on your.
It's a piece of paper.
wrist. Yeah.
I mean, obviously, not just regular paper.
It's laminated.
It's laminated.
Basically, yeah.
But you're looking and.
Yeah, I'm sure if you're an experienced diver, you know those things back and forth.
Right.
But because there's such a thing as nitrogen narcosis or hydrogen, you can breathe hydrogen, but apparently it has a trippy effect on you too. You would want to be able to have something to look at so you're not just relying on your brain. But they haven't printed out, yeah.
So the idea is, like, how much leeway is it? Like, you can't go, like, don't go 10 feet higher or you're in big trouble? Like, it can't be
it's not
down to the
necessarily
inch or anything, right?
I don't think it's that, although I suspect that as we advance, like, we'll have it down to the inch and, like, by different kinds of people and genetics and stuff like that. But right now, it is, I think it is graduated in 10 feet, or maybe 10 meters, because that's an atmosphere. But it says stay at this depth for this amount of time before moving up 10 meters.
So hang out for another minute?
So I think it's longer than that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and what you're doing is you're allowing the nitrogen that's dissolved in your blood to turn back into gas, go to your lungs, and then be expirated, to be breathed out by you slowly. That's what you're doing. And so they figured out that after, say, 10 minutes at 30 meters, you have removed enough of that blood or that nitrogen from your blood that you can safely move up to the next 10 meters above.
And you're neutral at this point?
You're just hanging out, hanging
like
on a line.
Like you're not sinking and you're not rising
right.
unless you try to.
No, you have a buoyancy vest that is keeping you neutral.
Gotcha.
Yeah, you're just hanging out.
All right.
Yeah, you don't want to rise. Now, if you're in big trouble and like you're out of air, you want to make your way to the surface and just press your luck.
Like bends be darned.
Right. Like I'm either going to drown or have the bends, and maybe the bends won't kill me, but drowning will definitely kill me.
Right.
Even though we learned that drowning is not necessarily what you think it is.
Well, that's true.
But if you aren't in any trouble, you want to go through the decompression schedule.
Okay.
You got it?
Yeah, I mean, I knew about this stuff, but I've never really kind of thought about exactly how that worked.
I wonder if we do need to do a scuba episode now.
Maybe.
Maybe not.
I mean, what are you doing while you're waiting around?
You're just waiting around looking at fish.
Looking at fish.
If you're with
coelacanths.
You should be with a buddy. It's tough to communicate unless you have radio.
Right.
And in which case, if you do have radio, you're probably listening to XM or something like that instead. But you can communicate with hand signals.
Or us.
Sure. Yeah, you could listen to stuff you should know.
That'd be nice.
It's a great idea.
So let's go back to traveling. We talked about the grab and pull, the pull and glide, the grab and float. You can also have one of those, and this is what I would totally have, one of those cool little DPVs, driver propulsion vehicle.
Yeah.
It's the little torpedo-looking, it's sort of like a boat propeller that's enclosed, and it just pulls you along.
Yeah, you just hang on to it, and it drags you behind it.
Yeah, I always thought those were really cool.
Yeah, they are cool. They're kind of James